Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Name on the Trophy. The Manchester United podcast is back. We've had a lengthy break. We've been busy in our lives for a number of weeks, so we apologise first and foremost for our absence. I'm Dominic. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, my confidant, Alex Wylie. He's looking surprised because I've given him the co-host title.
Yeah, you slipped there because I haven't been co-host for months, but you've taken a month off and you've forgotten that I'm not actually the co-host. I'm a confidant.
I
So
was
yeah,
talking to
I'm
some
delighted with that.
friends about the podcast, and they don't know you and described you as the co-host. So I thought that's
Really,
if the neutrals are thinking you're a co-host, then we need to bow to the listeners. What the listeners expect.
I've put the work in at this point. At this point, I feel like I deserve the title, so I'm glad that it's made its way to me.
Yeah, I need to count up how many caps you've got or how many appearances, and we can equate that to a Manchester United player of the past. Probably some sort of, I think you're probably on some sort of flop, a William Prunier style flop at the moment. So we'll have to see how that goes. I'll bring you that on the start of the next episode. Today we're going to be chatting a little bit about the Manchester United proposed takeover. We're obviously recording this at the start of May. The bidding process has been finalised. The deadline has passed, and the two leading bidders, everybody knows by this point, as Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim and the Qatari consortium. So we'll get straight into the bones of that, really, Alex. It's obviously the story that's dominating the United sort of news landscape at the moment. I know there's obviously an FA Cup final and a top four race and lots of things on the pitch to be interested in, but this has sort of dominated fans' thinking for a good few weeks now, and I sort of feel like the tension is in the air ahead of the process being completely finalised and a new person taken over from the Glazers.
Yeah, it's slightly strange, I think, because these deadlines keep coming and going, and then I can't speak for the fan base, but I myself sort of forget about them. I mean, obviously the deadline was literally last week, and I'd already forgotten about it before prepping for this podcast. But it's possible that at any point in the next few days, like quite a seminal moment is going to happen for United in deciding which way it's going to go, which is both terrifying and exciting. So, yeah, a real strange one. I know you mentioned the tension. I'm very much focused on the football. I've not really thought about it too much, but like I said, I can't speak for the entire fan base.
Yeah, well, it seems like the social media fan base, particularly, and I think you can stretch that over into the match going fans as well, because obviously we saw that protest before the game against Aston Villa at Old Trafford, and I think there was a banner, a no to Qatar banner in the away end at Brighton the other night. I think it's very much foremost in a lot of fans' thoughts. I think primarily because of the summer that's coming up, and that's going to form part of our chat today. How important the takeover is for United's summer transfer plans. I mean, Eric Ten Hag hasn't really been able to avoid this subject at his press conferences recently, and he's just said, "I don't have any influence on that. I need to have money to spend, but it's completely out of his hands." How did United even plan though for a summer transfer window when they've got sort of no idea what their budget is going to be? All the people behind the scenes who aren't involved in the ownership are working blind almost going into the summer.
Yeah, from what I read, staff have been told at United that it's business as usual, which is bizarre given the circumstances. But uh, when prepping for the podcast, I looked into the FFP restrictions that would be going into this window. And from what I gather, it's a budget of roughly 100 million. So even if the Qataris are to take over with their billions of pounds, it doesn't actually really affect the window in terms of the maximum that we can spend. It obviously affects the minimum, because my concern is that even though we could spend 100 million, the Glazers just won't bother, because as far as they're concerned, what's the point? But in terms of the maximum, I've heard United being linked with Mbappe, Camavinga, and I think it was Kingsley Coman that you sent across to me.
Yeah.
There's no way that fits into a £100 million budget, even if that budget includes amortization that we've spoken about before I don't know if it does, but there's no way you can afford those 3 players with 100 million cap. So yes, it affects the maximum, the minimum that we can spend. It doesn't really affect the maximum.
No, I think maybe the amortization might come into it. We've seen United spend in excess of 100 million in some of windows gone by. I mean, I think 150 to 200 tends to be around the mark that they've spent in the sort of last 3, 4, 5 windows. I mean, they spent 80 million on Harry Maguire in one window, and I think they signed a couple of other players that same summer. So I wouldn't think it's out of the question for United to spend more than that. I do think that what you say about the Glazers is absolutely bang on. I mean, we had a January window when this process was beginning in the takeover, and that January window saw United sign 2 players on loan, one of which was about Weghorst, who we probably need another podcast to sum up his spell at United. Actually, I did one right at the start, and we might be worth revisiting that, what we both thought about Weghorst. But basically, United can't have another window like that January. They can't be trying to loan people and get people on the cheap and on the free. I mean, at risk of quoting Gary Neville, but this is Manchester United we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it's Manchester United feeling like they've made a step forward under Ten Hag, but they still have quite a few more steps to go. And really, you make those big steps in transfer windows. And what was so frustrating about January is it was clear we needed a few additions, obviously up front, just because Martial was injured all the time, that we didn't end up making. And yeah, we can't have the Glazers for a summer window because we are going to take not only not a step forward, but probably a step back. And just to go on to the amortization point, just to really hammer it home, I read it was 100 million pounds on the Athletic. I don't know if that is literally 100 million pounds that can be spent on transfer fees in that window, or if it's the amortization thing I was talking about before. So say Harry Maguire, we signed him for 80 million. I think he signed a 4-year contract off the top of my head. I'm not 100% sure. That would only go down as 20 million in the budget because you divide it by 4. So I don't know if that 100 it's a big point to make, because I don't know if that whether amortization has been taken into consideration on the 100 million or not. Because if it is just 100 million as actual transfer fees, that's going to be very difficult to do. If it's 100 million including amortization, which I'm assuming it is, that actually gives us a bit more to work with.
Yeah, I think you probably will be. It tends to be how clubs do business now. But even as you say, there's financial fair play factors to come into it. Newcastle are probably a good example. You know, they haven't actually broken the bank since their takeover in recent years. They've sort of been a bit shrewd about it, sort of operate on a window by window basis rather than, you know, what Chelsea have done after their takeover, which was the other side of the coin very much. And we all know how that's worked out for them. I mean, I'm looking down a United transfer blog at the moment on goal.com, and the players that United are linked with. I mean, you mentioned the 3 that I said before: Mbappe, Coman, was Camavinga the other one? I mean, Lautaro Martinez, his name crops up. Mbappe again, Andreas Christensen from Barcelona. The Jurriën Timber rumors are still flying around. I mean, these are players, none of them are going to come cheap. Ashraf Hakimi is another one I think United have been linked with. These players will keep coming in the press. We know that. And we know that none of them are going to be cheap. And especially the ones that United need. A striker, Harry Kane or Victor Osimhen, the 2 top targets, especially aren't going to come cheap. It feels like we're back in the Wild West of Manchester United, and it needs a new ownership and stability and planning from the club, none of which has been really prevalent in recent years to make this happen in a sort of smooth and coherent way.
Yeah, planning is a key thing that you point out, because you think about the smart clubs. You think about, I hate to say it, I always do, Liverpool. You think about Brighton, who I think quite handily beat us yesterday. They're already making moves in the window. So Liverpool are already negotiating for McAllister. From the sounds of it, they're leading the race. I know we're interested, but they're already leading the race. And Brighton have more or less secured James Milner, who you can say is a good or bad signing. I don't really care. The point is the fact they're doing the business. And also João Pedro from Watford has also been secured. that's what smart clubs do. They plan ahead and they go early, and we seem to not plan at all and go late. And already, I know the window hasn't even started yet. Already, it feels like that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be even worse if the takeover is protracted into the summer, and even the small possibility that the Glazers don't sell more than majority share. If they stay on as majority shareholders and accept a minority investment from one of those US groups, I think there's 3 US hedge funds that have been talked about as taking minority stakes off the Glazers. That's not going to change from recent years. It's going to be the same old from what we've seen. And this is possibly one of the more interesting links that I'm just looking at now, which is that Sheikh Nassim and his entourage reportedly are sounding out Paris Saint-Germain over the possible signing of Neymar at Manchester United. I mean, I think this is an important point that you may have made on the podcast before. Regardless of what you think about Qatar, human rights, state ownership, any of that, put that up to one side. They actually haven't run PSG particularly well. PSG have been chaotic and underperformed, especially in the Champions League since their Qatari ownership. So that's for me, that is a concern for. I know it's not exactly the same group. We've got to be careful on talking about whether it's the same group or not, but. They haven't done a particularly good job owning PSG. That is a fact.
Yeah, you can be careful about saying they're not the same group. I'll probably stick my neck out a little bit more and say they more or less are the same group. It's the Qatari state wanting to buy the club in the same way that the Saudi Arabian state bought Newcastle and Manchester City owned by UAE. That's what I feel it is. You're spot on that they haven't ran PSG remotely well. They've ran after shiny things. There hasn't been a lot of planning. I know Neymar, this is probably why the links have been made. Neymar had fans outside his house yesterday, I think, basically chanting. And yeah, it's not just the Champions League that they've underperformed. I mean, there's actually been League One titles that they've let slip from their grasp as well, which when you consider the amount of money they spend is appalling. And I'm not sure. Part of me wants to say, oh, it's sports washing. That's why they're going after these shiny objects. But I guess the counter argument to that is how UAE have controlled City. They've, to be fair to them, ran the club very well. There's been a lot of money and there's been certain sponsorships that might not be
there is an
real,
ongoing financial fair play investigation into Manchester City, for sure. Yeah.
And that's fair. But in terms of actual on the pitch performances and the players they're bringing through and how quickly they churn the squad over, they've done a very good job. So I'm not sure if it's just a Qatari problem, but United fans need to take that into consideration. If it's actually about winning games, and for me it is, the Qataris have not done a very good job of that at PSG whatsoever.
No, I think people look at the amount of money that City have spent, and like you say, they have done a lot of things right, the City ownership. But United fans are desperate for an ownership that does that and that makes proper good football decisions the way Manchester City have done for a number of years, especially since Pep Guardiola's been manager. But it might not automatically happen. Whoever owns United, like that word planning is the most important word. You can have all the money in the world. Todd Bowley, hello. You need to be able to plan how to build your club, how to invest. And I think the biggest thing for United, for me personally, whoever's the owner, listen to Erik ten Hag, because I think he's got a lot right in the transfer market. He got a lot right in his first window in the summer last year. He just needs to build on it. Like you say, we're at the first rung of a ladder for Manchester United at the moment, and it's quite a long ladder.